I don't know if we're in the good times or the bad times, but it seems Pixar and DreamWorks are just fighting head-to-head to be the biggest, most trendy news piece. But that comes as a double-edged sword. Sometimes it's one of the greatest movie box offices we've seen in a long, long time, and sometimes it's an extension of the worst thing we've ever seen this year. But at the same time, it's not necessarily a one-sided debate of who's the good one and who's the bad one, because Pixar have their own red flags going on in the background as well right now. Namely, it is their position when it comes to future Pixar content. Now, we've already covered a little bit before about how Pixar are now looking to cut out the personal director's stories for their future projects, going for more mass appeal stuff, but in going with that line of logic, they are also looking into sequels. And while I'll probably do a big video soon about every possible sequel they could possibly do and where to go from here, there is a specific article that came out a little bit ago, specifically saying that Pixar are now actively looking for ideas to do at least a Monsters, Inc. 3. This really wasn't on my dance card, I'll be honest. In fact, in a video recently about Inside Out's potential to be Pixar's new Toy Story, I actually made the argument for why they wouldn't do one. And yet, here we are. It's not necessarily confirmed yet, but let's be honest, if they're thinking about it and it's clear that they're going for mass appeal, it's probably coming in some form or another. Color me surprised that they're thinking about it, and yet maybe not so surprised that they're having such a hard time thinking of it being actually a good idea. In the press run-up leading to Inside Out 2, the creator of both Monsters, Inc. and Inside Out, Pete Docter, now also Pixar's big boss, has just been dropping bomb after bomb. This came out pretty soon after he absolutely dumped on the idea of doing live-action remakes of Pixar movies. In fact, the way he said it kind of implied that he might ruffle some corporate feathers, so that's always fun. Micro-dramas in the super successful.
Okay, let's see what this guy is really all...
He specifically said on the concept of live-action remakes, the idea of it kind of bothers me, and I like making movies that are original and unique to themselves, which basically undercuts the whole idea of the Disney live-action remakes and kind of, takes a stab at your own boss. I'm sure he'll get a stern letter from Bob Iger about this, but fair play, Pete. I agree with you. To be fair, he was specifically asked about a Ratatouille remake, and we already kind of got that in Everything Everywhere All at Once, so we don't really need it. Back to the possibility of a Monsters, Inc. 3, Docter has said that they are actively looking for ideas to do it, but haven't gotten into development yet. That's some big news that they're looking into this, right? I never thought that this would actually be something they'd do. I kind of thought Monsters at Work was the compromise, which showed why a new movie was so difficult. The original Monsters, Inc., now 23 years old, was such a masterfully self-contained film, which is great as, in my opinion, it is one of the greatest animated movies of all time. Is that really contested? Maybe the idea that it should have beaten Shrek to that first Best Animated Oscar is a little bit more contentious, but hey, I'm saying it.
And the Oscar goes to Shrek, Aaron Warner.
The concept for the world was so strong and well realized, establishing how truly inventive Pixar could be. Casting Billy Crystal and John Goodman in the title roles remains iconic and absolutely lived up to the precedent of Tom Hanks and Tim Allen in Toy Story. I mean, really think about it, those were massive shoes to fill, and they mastered it. And despite all the bells and whistles of the overall concept, the emotional story being told between Sully and Boo remained in the sharp focus the whole time. Once Boo comes into Sully's world, she completely changes it for him and ultimately the whole monster society at large. The whole concept that monsters really are scaring kids at night and they're doing it for electricity is made completely redundant by the end of the movie. The scaring idea was cool, but now we know that laughter is more powerful. Amazing conclusion, does not necessarily invite a sequel. However, when you're attached to a money-hungry juggernaut as your corporate parent, this becomes not so great when you are being mandated to push for a sequel. This is why, to keep the scaring premise alive, Pixar returned to Monsters, Inc. 2013 with a prequel instead. Ah yes, Monsters University. You know what? It is one of the better 2010 sequel attempts. Nowhere near the heights of the original, but I really enjoy it nonetheless. The closest it gets, as I've gone through in a previous video, is the scene where Mike finally has to confront his limitations despite how hard he worked for what he's wanted. It's incredibly mature storytelling and a perspective you don't really get a lot in movies. The underdog is always supposed to overcome their limitations, Which Mike then goes and does, but he doesn't do it by suddenly being able to do the things he was previously unable to. On top of that, they did a great job expanding the Monsters lore, creating a whole college paradigm that completely makes sense for that universe. And yes, the slug gag's funny, okay. Despite not being on the same levels of all-time classic as the original, I do think a lot of people have fond memories of this one too. For my age group, this was just before we were actually at college age, so there's always going to feed into things. It's a college movie that kids can watch, which is awesome, because people seem to neglect the fact that a lot of kids don't understand what higher education even is until one day you find yourself as a teenager and are like, oh, I can do that? Oh, okay. Wow, I had more praise for this than I thought I did. Nonetheless, it further fed into this idea that a proper sequel just wouldn't be that interesting. Without the scaring in there as the intrigue, you're left with the nicer and goofier laughter factory. At the end of Monsters Inc., they really hammer this home as a well-rounded, happy ending. This is the princess and prince thing. Charlie's been given the chocolate factory, Scott got with Ramona, whatever your poison. It's cute, but I wonder how you can make a feature-length story around that. To be fair, this is Disney, who made 3 more Star Wars movies after Luke Skywalker definitively wiped out the Empire, but then they came back with a different name and twice the resources without explanation. If they want Pixar to find a way, they will get them to find a way.
Tell me we have something that will not cause a boycott.
And I guess the compromise really was Monsters at Work. Hey there, thank you for making it to the halfway mark of this video. This is the part where we tell you to subscribe if you haven't already. Alongside occasionally covering any trending movie articles like this sequel, we're also going to start taking on more broad approaches like what Pixar can do in the future from now on, or how to fix DreamWorks and stuff like that. So if any of it interests you, do tag along. Otherwise, thank you for making it halfway through. I'll now let you get back to the rest of the speculative Monsters Inc. 3. Monsters at Work. I've covered this a few times now. Season 1, I wasn't so big on. Season 2, much better. Still not amazing, but a substantial improvement. To be fair to those behind the scenes, this was simply not an easy prompt to deal with. As I've said, the laughter angle just doesn't seem to have the same intrigue as the scare floor. If we did have a series about the scare floor, I bet this series would have had a lot more interest from people older than 10. On paper, the laughter floor just feels like okay, so they're just doing the Comedy Store, but with monsters. Plus, I don't really like any of the jokes they actually did in that show. They weren't good comedians anyway. Plus, we have comedians and clowns in the real world. Sorry, jokesters, it's nothing we've not seen before. Despite this, they've definitely just run with it, and by the time the second season rolled around, they definitely seem to have settled in with the concept. However, one thing with the second season is it definitely looks a lot cheaper. Initially, it looked like we were going to get near Pixar quality for the series. However, by the time season 2 came around, it's definitely knocking on the DreamWorks TV looking door. Not quite as bad as Megamind Rules, but there's a slippery slope there. But I get it, it isn't a feature film budget, and more to the point, this one wasn't even done in-house by Pixar. The idea of human-monster relationships for the laughter is interesting, and you do wonder if this does open the door, if you'll pardon the pun, on Sully going back to Boo, because really, that's the one big plotline that would really get people to see a third one. The original was never centrally about the scaring or laughing, they were there to accentuate the story between Sully and Boo. Weirdly, Monsters at Work seems to have followed this on better than Monsters University did, establishing that monsters now form friendships with kids to bring laughter. And I'd be intrigued to see how that would impact things for Sully. Does he go back to Boo? Is she still a child, or do we now face a very different story with Boo as an adult? We could do it with Riley in Inside Out, why not? What happens to an adult when they discover that the monsters of their infant imagination were actually real? Has she made life choices based on her entry into Monstropolis? I think that should make for an interesting movie. It's certainly not the first time the concept of a Monsters Inc. sequel revolved around this reunion. As myself and many others have documented at this point, back when Pixar was just a collaborator with Disney towards the end of their contract, and at the time desperate Disney planned to completely betray their relationship. You see, Disney's in-house productions weren't doing as well as their Pixar collaborators, which made their ever-nearing end of the contract quite scary for them. So what do you do when you're worried about losing your most bankable animation studio? Why, you go behind their back and plan a bunch of cheap straight-to-DVD sequels, of course. This obviously didn't happen, they fixed things up and Disney just bought Pixar instead. However, whilst this was still a possibility, one planned sequel was indeed to Monsters Inc. And they went... Well, a bit depressing, to be honest. You can watch our original video, the cancelled Monsters, Inc. sequel, for the full plot, but in short, there would have been a lot of monsters going into the human world as Mike and Sully tried to find Boo. We're thinking a feature-length version of the bit of Monsters, Inc. where they get stuck in the human world, which, to be honest, is also my favourite part of that movie, so maybe they were onto something. As with the last movie, the voyage would have had the same tension in Mike and Sully's relationship, as Sully seems to prioritise Boo over their safety. However, by the end of the movie, they would have found Boo as an old lady. And no, she would not have been the witch from Brave, okay? So yeah, tear-jerking stuff. However, particularly with this cancelled project publicly available, I think Pixar will be looking to steer as far away from this Imitator Studios script as possible. I mean, could you imagine it? We go full circle that a slapped together straight to DVD cancelled sequel will actually be revitalized by the mainline studio just because it's going through interesting times. That would be quite the plot line for a bingo card. Nonetheless, with all of this likelihood that that won't be the direction they take, I don't think this takes Boo completely off of the table. It's just a matter of her being a more active part of the movie, rather than a wild goose chase for an old lady, you know? Seen that enough in Interstellar. Rather, I think you could get some great comedy of a young woman having to hide these two clumsy monsters in the human world. At the same time, can it really be as simple as that? I'm not sure, but if the top-of-the-line writers room at Pixar can't think of a decent story, then a schmuck like me certainly isn't going to. Regardless, there's still one player now very much on the table who may as well have just set things up for a sequel, and for those of you who still want to watch Monsters at Work Season 2, this is your spoiler warning. So here we go. Randall is back in the monster world, and he is at large. At the end of Season 2, after a scheme to relaunch Scare Energy by passing off Monsters, Inc.'s Laugh Energy as his own, he escapes custody and remains on the loose. Now, they could continue to explore this in Monsters at Work Season 3, but a Monsters, Inc. 3 would definitely benefit from this plot thread. Although, just to say this now, they cannot rely on their audience to have seen Monsters at Work to get this third movie. We really don't need another Marvel flub. But this is Disney. Anyway, there is something there about Mike and Sully going on a voyage into the human world with Boo to resolve an energy crisis. Meanwhile, Randall rigs the whole system, basically becoming some kind of oil oligarch in the monster world, I guess. However, with the two leads on an adventure whilst the villain takes over the city, I realize I am literally just retelling the plotline of the original SpongeBob movie. I guess that's not entirely a bad thing. It's a great movie, and timeline-wise, I guess it takes place at the same time as the original Monsters, Inc., you know, it's the early 2000s. Maybe there's a connection you can make there. Anyway, though I doubt the third movie would actually be that, I would wager that at least one of these elements could very well be a part of it. That and those two goofy maintenance guys, you know, I love them. Sorry! They're great to impersonate. I do think this may well happen eventually, although they may want to hurry up, because John Goodman's getting a little up there. I mean, I can't see this coming out any earlier than 2028, and by that time the franchise will swiftly be heading towards 30 years old already. Ugh. But it would certainly make money. I just don't know if it'll be much good. Probably kinda mid, like a lot of 2010 sequels they did. That's my initial thoughts anyway. All sparked from a single article that said they're specifically, potentially looking into it. And maybe I'll now get around to the general future of Pixar, now that Inside Out 2 was such a bop and Disney is so tumultuous. What do you think about Pixar saying they are completely open for a Monsters, Inc. sequel? Would you want to see it? You want something new? Is it all a disaster? I'd love to hear your thoughts over on our Discord server or the YouTube comments. And if there's one thing to remember, at least it's not as bad as what's going on at DreamWorks. Good lord, what a time for animation. My name's been Daz, thank you very much for reaching the end of this video, and I shall see you in a little bit.